I work nights at a small, kind of run-down hotel off the interstate, the kind of place people stay when they've been driving for too long and just need a bed, not a vacation. It's not fancy, but it's quiet most of the time. And I actually like the night shift because there's usually only me at the desk and one other person working security or doing laundry somewhere in the back. The guy on duty that night was Mike, a big guy in his late 40s who's been here longer than I've been alive, so I never really worry about anything going wrong. It was close to midnight when he walked in. The door swung open slowly, and this huge guy stepped inside. I mean huge, not just tall, but broad, like he could block the whole hallway if he wanted to. He had this long, heavy coat on, even though it wasn't that cold, and his hair looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. But the thing that got me right away was his eyes. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. But there was something off, too still, too locked on me in this way that made my stomach tighten. He didn't even say hello, just walked straight up to the desk and said, "I need room 617. I typed into the computer, pretending to check, even though I knew before I finished that we didn't even have a 617. Our highest floor is 4, and our rooms only go up to 4 to 20. I told him politely, "Sorry, sir, we don't have a room like that." He just stared at me, no blinking, no change in expression. I said, "I need 6 to 17. I explained again, a little slower, that there's no such room in this hotel. Maybe he had the wrong place. Maybe he meant a different number. He leaned closer to the counter and said it again, almost like he was testing me. 6, 17. Now, normally I'm patient with guests, even the weird ones, but he was making my skin crawl, and I could feel my pulse picking up. So I told him firmly, "Sir, I already told you, that room doesn't exist. You need to check your information." That's when his face changed, just a tiny twitch, like he'd been holding something in, and now it was leaking out. His jaw tightened, and his hands curled on the counter. "Don't lie to me," he said, and his voice dropped in this way that made me glance toward the back door, wishing Mike was standing there. I said, "I'm not lying. I'm telling you the truth. You need to leave." He didn't leave. Instead, he reached across the counter faster than I expected for someone his size and grabbed at my shirt, yanking me forward hard enough that my chest hit the wood. I yelled, shoved back, tried to twist away. But he was unbelievably strong, his grip like a clamp. Mike must have heard me, because suddenly he came barreling out from the hallway, shouting at the guy to let go. The man turned his head, just enough to see him, and I swear there was something almost satisfied in his eyes, like he'd been waiting for more of us to show up. Mike grabbed his arm, tried to pull him off me, but it was like trying to move a tree. The guy let go of me just long enough to shove Mike back against the wall, and then they were grappling, knocking into the desk, knocking over the computer monitor. Mike's a strong dude, but he couldn't get him under control. This man was fighting like it wasn't even about winning, just about not stopping. I grabbed the phone with shaking hands, but before I could dial, I saw that Mike had already hit the emergency call button by the door when he first came out. The police were on their way. It felt like forever, but in reality it was maybe 3 or 4 minutes before we heard sirens outside. Even with both of us trying to keep him in one place, the guy was throwing his weight around so hard that my arms felt like they were going to tear out of their sockets. When the police burst through the door, it took 3 of them to get him on the ground and cuffed. They let him out, still shouting about 617 like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. Mike and I just stood there, in the wreck of the front desk, both of us breathing like we'd run a mile. Later, one of the officers came back in to take our statements. He told us they'd run his name and found out he wasn't drunk or high, just severely mentally ill, with a history of wandering into hotels looking for that same non-existent room. Apparently, he'd been in and out of hospitals for years. I couldn't stop thinking about how calm he'd been when he first walked in, and how quickly that calm had snapped into something else. I also couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd said, "Don't lie to me," like he knew something I didn't. That night, when I finally got off shift, I walked past every single room on my way out, just to make sure there really wasn't a 617. I've been working nights at this gas station for a couple of years now. It's one of those places you only stop at if you really need to. Dim lights, 2 pumps that always seem to be acting up, and a convenience store that smells like coffee and motor oil, no matter how many times you mop the floor. Most nights are slow. The occasional trucker grabs coffee, a couple of locals pick up cigarettes. Maybe someone stops for gas on their way through town. I don't usually get spooked easily, but this one night still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. It was just past midnight, cold enough that you could see your breath when you stepped outside. I was behind the counter, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed headlights coming down the road. Big, high beams, looked like a semi. The truck slowed down, but didn't pull up to the pumps. Instead, it rolled past and stopped about 30 yards away, out by the far corner of the lot, where the security light only half reaches. I couldn't see the logo or the plates clearly from the window, just a long, dark trailer and a cab that looked older. At first, I figured maybe they were just resting or making a phone call, but then I saw movement. 2 men climbed down from the cab. They were tall. I mean really tall. Had to be at least 6'3" or 6'4" each. Broad shoulders, built like they'd spent their lives hauling heavy stuff. Both of them wore dark jackets and masks. Not ski masks, but those heavy-duty respirator-style ones that cover most of the face. I remember thinking, why the hell would you need that out here? It wasn't dusty, it wasn't smoky, just cold air. They stood near the side of the truck, talking quietly. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their heads stayed close, like they were making sure no one overheard. After a minute, one of them walked toward the back of the trailer. He opened the latch, looked inside, moved something around. The other one stayed by the cab, glancing toward the station every so often. I could feel my chest tightening. The front door to the store was still unlocked, and I didn't like the idea of 2 masked strangers knowing that. So I stepped out from behind the counter, planning to lock up for a bit. That's when the guy near the cab turned his head and spotted me through the glass. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just froze, staring for maybe 2 seconds before nudging the other guy. They both started walking toward the station. I told myself maybe they just wanted gas or directions, but my gut was screaming at me. Something about the way they moved, slow, deliberate, made my skin crawl. When they got close enough for the cameras to catch them, I noticed something else. They were both carrying something under their jackets. Not tools, not flashlights. Guns. They stopped just short of the door. One of them tapped the glass with his knuckles. The sound was sharp, like he wasn't knocking to be polite. I backed up toward the phone on the counter. My voice shook as I told the dispatcher there were 2 armed men outside the station. She told me to stay on the line. Stay out of sight, and that units were on their way. The men moved around the building. I could hear their boots crunching on the gravel as they passed under the side windows. Every so often one of them would try a door handle. Side door, back storage entrance. Luckily, they were all locked. They came back to the front, stood there for a moment. Then one of them stepped closer to the glass again. His eyes conned the room, like he was memorizing every detail. I ducked behind the counter so he couldn't see me. The sound of sirens in the distance must have spooked them, because a second later, they turned and started walking fast, almost running back toward the truck. By the time the first cruiser pulled into the lot, the semi was already rumbling out onto the highway. I pointed the cops in the direction they'd gone, and 2 units took off after them. I stayed in the store with one officer while he asked questions. What they looked like, what they were wearing, which way they went. My hands were still shaking when I poured myself a cup of coffee, just to have something warm to hold. About 40 minutes later, the radio on the officer's shoulder crackled with an update. The truck had been stopped. They didn't just find weapons. Turns out the back of that truck was packed with boxes of, let's just say, things you definitely can't move across state lines without expecting a knock from the feds. From what one of the officers told me later, these guys had been running that kind of operation for a while, using back roads and quiet little stops like ours to check their load or pass things off to someone else. Apparently, they weren't expecting a gas station clerk to be awake. Watching, and quick enough to call the cops. One of the officers actually came back in the next day to thank me personally, said the guys had enough on them to put them away for years. I just nodded and said I was glad I locked the side door earlier. But inside, I kept thinking about one thing. If I'd hesitated for even a minute, if I'd tried to talk to them instead of calling right away, that night could have ended very differently. Even now, when a truck pulls in late at night, I can feel that same tension creeping into my chest, and every time I lock the door, I make sure to double-check it. I had been working the night shift at this small, slightly run-down bar on the outskirts of town for almost a year. It wasn't fancy, by any means, just your standard, dimly lit corner bar where locals came to unwind after long days. Most nights were quiet enough that I could handle everything alone, or with just one other bartender. Usually there were only 3 of us working the late shift, and somehow that made the place feel almost peaceful. The hum of the fridge, the clinking of glasses, and the faint sound of traffic outside became a rhythm that I got used to. But, like I would soon realize, peace at night can be deceiving. One night, just past midnight, the door swung open and this guy walked in. He looked to be in his early 50s, dressed neatly, clean-shaven, and with an air about him that immediately made me pay attention. Not threatening, just present. There was something about the way he moved and looked around, like he was used to being noticed. His eyes settled on me, sharp and calculating, and I felt a chill I couldn't explain. He walked up to the bar and asked my name in this soft, calm voice that somehow felt like it carried weight. Then he asked about my job, how long I'd been working there, the usual questions that seemed normal at first. He ordered the priciest drinks on the menu, refusing anything less, and left a tip that was way more than anyone would normally leave. I blinked a few times, making sure I wasn't imagining it, but he was gone in a blink, leaving only the faint echo of his presence behind. 2 days later, he was back. I remember that night clearly. The air felt heavier, the bar quieter than usual. He asked again about me, this time suggesting casually but pointedly that if I worked for him outside the bar, there would be plenty in it for me. Money, perks, everything he could offer. I smiled politely and said, no. I wasn't interested, and no tip, no offer, no charm would change that. He nodded, smiled, and left, like nothing had happened, but the feeling of unease lingered long after he disappeared. That night, everything felt off. My body ached in a way it hadn't before, a dull fatigue that mixed with a gnawing sense of dread. My colleague drove me home, and I noticed a car following us at a distance. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just someone heading the same way, but no matter which turns we took, the car stayed behind. I didn't say anything to my colleague. I didn't want to sound paranoid. When I got home, the car was still there, parked outside my apartment building. I froze. My keys shook in my hand as I approached the door. Slowly, I unlocked it, stepped inside, and locked it again, heart pounding, like I had run a marathon. And then, there was a knock. Soft, deliberate, quick enough that it could have been mistaken for something else if I wasn't paying attention, but I knew it was him. I crept toward the peephole and looked. His face was calm, motionless, watching me. I slowly backed away, fumbling for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to brace them against the wall just to dial 911. I whispered my address, explaining the situation as quietly as I could. Staying low in the apartment, I listened to every single sound, the faint creak of the floorboards, the wind rattling the window, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Minutes stretched like hours. I didn't dare peek again until the operator told me the police were nearby. But before they could arrive, he was gone, just vanished. No sound of a car leaving, no footsteps fading into the distance. Only the lingering dread that settled like a weight on my chest. Heavier than before. I didn't return to the bar. Even thinking about it made my stomach twist with unease. That man His presence had left something behind that I couldn't shake. My life felt smaller, fragile somehow. And I needed to get away, at least temporarily. I moved back to my parents' house, where familiar walls, enamels, voices, and routines gave me a sense of comfort I hadn't realized I missed. I work at a small hotel just outside the city. It's not some high-rise Marriott or anything like that, more like a low rectangular building that's been sitting in the same spot for decades. 30 rooms total, 2 floors, a parking lot in the front that's big enough for a few trucks if someone really needs it. Because it's privately owned and not part of any chain, we don't exactly pull in tourists. Most of the people who come through are either passing through on their way somewhere else, or they're in town for a couple nights for work. Contractors, traveling salespeople, the occasional family stopping for the night because they can't keep driving. I've been here long enough to recognize the regular types. I work a lot of late shifts, which means I'm usually the one sitting behind the front desk when the building goes quiet, when the lobby lights feel too bright, and the hallways seem too long and too empty. You start to notice little things in those hours. The hum of the soda machine in the corner, the way the front door makes a tiny click when the air pressure changes, and sometimes things that don't fit the usual rhythm at all. That night started just like any other. It was a Thursday, early spring, around 9:30 p.m. The lobby was empty, except for me, and the sound of the news playing low on the TV we keep muted most of the time. I was scrolling through the security feeds out of habit when the front door slid open and a man walked in. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Tall, lean, wearing a dark jacket that looked just a little too heavy for the weather, and carrying nothing but a small black duffel bag. He didn't smile or say hi the way some guests do, just walked straight to the desk and asked, in a low voice, if room 204 was available. That caught me a little off guard. Most people don't request specific rooms unless they've stayed here before, or they have some reason. But I pulled up the system anyway and checked. Sure enough, 204 was already booked by a single female guest who'd checked in earlier that afternoon. She'd been polite at the desk, asked about nearby food places, paid with a card. Nothing unusual. I told him, sorry, 204 is already taken, but we do have a few other rooms open if you'd like. He didn't say anything right away, just stood there, staring at the computer screen like maybe if he looked long enough, the reservation would disappear. Then he finally said, fine, give me 206. Now, 206 is right next to 204, practically sharing a wall. I handed him the key card, ran through the check-in spiel, checkout time, breakfast hours, Wi-Fi password, and he didn't ask a single follow-up question. Just took the card, picked up his bag, and headed for the hallway. We've got cameras in the hallways too, so I glanced at the monitor as he walked down, but instead of going into his room right away, he stopped in front of 204, stood there, facing the door, hands in his jacket pockets, completely still. At first, I thought maybe he was texting someone, or maybe he'd gotten the numbers mixed up and thought it was his room, but then a whole minute passed. He didn't move, didn't even fidget, just stood there like he was waiting for something. And then he knocked. Not a loud, aggressive knock, just 3 calm taps, the kind of knock you'd use if you already knew the person inside. He waited. No one opened the door. I kept watching. He didn't knock again, didn't walk away right away either, just stood there for another 30 seconds before finally going into 206. I tried to shake it off. People do weird things. Maybe he really did know her and didn't realize she was already asleep, but I still made a little note in the log, just in case. About 20 minutes later, I saw him on the screen again. He'd come out of 206, walked right back to 204, and stopped in the same spot, staring at the door like it might open any second. I leaned closer to the monitor. After half a minute, he knocked again, waited, tilted his head a little, like he was listening for something on the other side. Then he stepped even closer, almost pressing his ear to the door. That's when I decided I needed to go down there. When I rounded the corner, he was still standing there, head tilted. I said, "Sir, is there some kind of problem?" He turned his head toward me. Not all the way, just enough for me to see his face in the dim light, and there was no expression on it. No annoyance, no embarrassment, just nothing. We stood there in silence for a few seconds, me holding his gaze, him not saying a word. Then, without a single syllable, he turned, walked back into 206, and shut the door. I stood there a moment longer, listening. I didn't hear movement inside his room. No footsteps, no voices, just the hum of the air conditioning. I went back to the desk, updated the log with what happened, and kept one eye on the monitors for the rest of my shift. He didn't come out again. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the whole thing wasn't just odd, it was wrong. The rest of the night passed quietly. A couple of late check-ins, some truckers coming in off the highway, nothing out of the ordinary. But when the clock hit about 5 a.m., I saw movement on the hallway feed again. It was the guest from 204. She had her suitcase with her, and she was walking fast, like she was late for a flight or trying to get somewhere in a hurry. But she didn't stop at the desk to check out, just walked straight out the side door, dropped her key card in the drop box without even looking inside the lobby, and kept going. I watched on the parking lot camera as she loaded her suitcase into her car. She didn't fumble or hesitate, just got in, started the engine, and drove away. Not even 30 minutes later, the man from 206 came down the hall, same duffel bag, same jacket. He approached the desk this time, slid his key card across without a word, and checked out. No good morning, no small talk, not even eye contact. After he left, I sat there, staring at the empty hallway feed for a long time. The air in the lobby felt heavier than usual. I tried to tell myself it was just coincidence, just two strangers leaving early for unrelated reasons. But the timing was too close. I've worked here long enough to know that sometimes people don't want you to know why they're leaving, and most of the time, I'm okay with that. My job isn't to pry. But something about that night stuck in my head.